You heard all of that from Bill Shorten. He's been burned by this absolute policy at the last election. Do you disagree with anything that he's saying?
Look, I disagreed with some of the more emotional descriptions Bill wanted to apply to a few areas, but I think his last point around we've got to end the weaponising of the climate debate, we've got to end the climate wars, we've got to find a way to meet in the middle here. And I think the vast majority of Australians are somewhere around about in the middle on this issue. They recognise that Australia comparably is a small emitter in terms of global emissions, less than 2%, but we have to be part of the international solution, that there is a movement on now towards more renewable technologies that can replace fossil fuels over a longer period of time. But then in those regional communities where you're perhaps more exposed, communities like mine, Latrobe Valley's in my electorate, where you're perhaps more exposed to these changes, really show people respect and the decency and give them what the actual plan is in terms of the actual jobs, when that's going to come online, and how your family will be not disadvantaged by any changes that are going to occur. So this is where I guess the sticking point in the National Party room is largely at the moment, is around just understanding this is bigger than an environmental issue. There are social and economic impacts here we need to work through as a nation in the national interest. Personally, I support the Prime Minister's stance on taking a position of net zero emissions by 2050 to Glasgow, but I have some reservations. I want some more details on how regional Australia will look in 2050 as well. So that's why I'm saying we should be having a Regional Australia 2050 white paper, go through a process that has a longer term strategic look at these challenges, because my community, the people in Gippsland, the people throughout Regional Australia I talk to, want to be part of the solution. They're practical environmentalists already. They're already joining land care and coast care and doing pest animal control, and they want to do fuel reduction burning and use Indigenous techniques for fire stick burning. They want to be part of the solution.
Indeed, and this is something I said to Bill Shorten as well. It's not just about these towns not being on board with the broader climate change agenda. It's about these towns being tied to an industry and their livelihood, the survival of them really depends on it. Now, are you saying you've got really no detail after a briefing from Angus Taylor and discussions with the Liberals, that you've got no detail on how those jobs will actually come online and how that transition will be made in communities like yours?
No, that's not fair to the Minister Taylor to suggest there's no detail. What I'm suggesting here is that he outlined the technology, not taxes approach, which I agree with. I think we can bring more Australians with us if we focus on the technological improvements that will deliver these emissions reductions rather than focusing on more taxes all the time. And I think regional Australians in particular would appreciate that approach. And we've seen that in Latrobe Valley already with a move towards hydrogen, which we think is a positive for us. We're seeing more interest in offshore wind farms, again, a positive for my community. So there is some things that are happening, but they're a few years out, Laura. So people aren't quite convinced that there's going to be a job for them yet. So we want a little bit more detail on, can we get an energy reliability, affordability guarantee here? Can we get some sort of jobs guarantee for regional Australians? And then you get to a point where you say, hang on, this is not quite working. We're going to have to pause a bit here and redirect our efforts and make sure that these regional communities aren't disadvantaged.
So what does a jobs guarantee look like, though? I mean, it sounds great, but how do you guarantee jobs in a regional town? It's a bit difficult, isn't it?
No, well, it's not as difficult as we perhaps thought in the past, Laura. There was a study done, a report done to government a couple of years ago called Regions at the Ready, and it talked about some of the catalytic investments that governments can make, can stimulate private sector investment in regional communities. And then you've seen with the coronavirus, Laura, where a lot of people in metropolitan areas have started to say, hang on, I don't need to go to the office every day. I can work from home in the suburbs. And then they've thought, well, hang on, if I can work from home in the suburbs, maybe I can work from home in regional Australia. And if good connectivity is there, so if you've got good road connectivity, good rail, good air connectivity, and the telco works, the telecommunication works, suddenly you're going to see some of these people with good high-paying jobs move to those regional communities. So what I'm talking about is understanding that there's a big change going on in regional Australia. And I don't like advocating for another report. A white paper sounds like you're just calling for another plan. But I think that will give us a strategic document for the next 10, 15, 20 years to look at what investments local, state and federal governments need to make, how we work with the private sector to ensure jobs in regional communities, and then give those regional families, the people in my community, the confidence that they can get on board with this plan, because it's going to be in their interest, in the national interest and in the world's interest. So that's what I'm pushing for.
Indeed. Where does this all end up, Darren Chester? It's hard to see that there's going to be any kind of kumbaya moment or full agreement. So is it a majority rules type situation in the party room? I know the Prime Minister has made it clear that this is essentially a decision for Cabinet, but we've seen what these decisions have done to majority decisions have done to former Prime Ministers and former leaders. It hasn't worked out so well for them in the past. So where does this all end up?
Well, look, I'm sorry if I was laughing a little bit. My record in tipping outcomes in the National Party room hasn't been so good in recent months, so I'm perhaps the wrong person to make a forecast. Look, what I see in my room, what I saw on Sunday and yesterday were people acting, I thought, very respectfully towards each other, constructively, coming forward with pragmatic and practical questions they want answered. I didn't see people driving any personal agendas. It was all about policies for regional Australia and saying, well, if we can get some surety around some of these issues, my nervousness about the plan goes away. I'm perhaps more forward-leaning in that regard. I'm perhaps more confident about how we can get to a result than some of my colleagues. But this conversation is ongoing. The colleagues having input into the sort of principles they want to see covered off. You've got to understand, of course, I think about half a dozen colleagues aren't even here this week because of COVID, so they're getting their input in virtually. So there's a bit of work still to be done. But look, I think the meetings we've had have been really reflected well in the party room. It's been a good constructive meeting, some of the best meetings I've been involved with the Nats for quite some time. So I'm optimistic that we're heading in the right direction there. But again, the feedback I'm getting on the ground from my constituents is they do want to see a unifying moment at some point here. They want the climate wars to end. They just want to see, grown-up people in Parliament working in the national interest, delivering an outcome, and then getting on with the other issues we have to deal with.
Okay, well, you better get to that meeting. Send us a text and let us know what the PM says, would you?
Don't hold your breath waiting for a live feed from the party room, Laura.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much, Darren Chester. See you soon.